John, I want to first of all thank you for this is sort of a bit of an endurance contest for y'all, because I know even changing up the speaker every now and then, you've seen way too much of me today. So this is my last time to talk to you. And I want to sort of end with this topic of perfectionism by reminding you of what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7. Turning there in verses 1 through 5, he's just given you sort of the Sermon on the Mount and given you so many things to live up to. And then he says, judge not, that you be not judged. So wait a minute. You're giving us all these standards, all these rules, all these rights and wrongs, all these ways to be blessed and whatnot. And now you're telling us not to judge. Well, he doesn't say not to judge. He just says, judge not, lest you be judged. So he's saying, don't judge a certain way that you don't want other people to judge you. Because in fact, a few chapters later, he's going to actually command us to judge righteously. And yet, it's important as Christians who are ambassadors of Christ, that are trying to be the pillar of truth. That's what the church is called in Scripture. Understand God's will for your life, and hopefully you're growing spiritually, and so you're going to be light years ahead of those who are carnally minded, who can't understand spiritual things. It's easy for you to appear self-righteous. It's easy for you to come across as a know-it-all, and we've got that reputation in the church to a certain degree. Maybe not as much anymore as we used to, and I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because it may reflect the fact that we're no longer as capable as we used to be. You know, it used to be in the day, the old story was that if they didn't have a Bible to be swearing witnesses on in court, they would just look for a member of the Church of Christ. Because these are the second best thing. I know faithful gospel preachers that were old school preachers that have memorized the entire New Testament, word for word. I think it's a dying art. How about you? So many sermons today can be preached without ever using the book. And so, I guess what I'm getting at is that we come by that reputation a little bit honestly. But that's part of the wisdom and the discernment and the kind of skill that we're going to have to develop if we're truly going to be able to speak the truth in love with gentleness and respect, as we're commanded to. So, here's his point. Judge not that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So he's not saying don't judge. He's just saying you need to understand that when you judge, make sure it's the kind of judgment that you want other people to use to judge you. And the only kind of judgment I want anybody judging me by is the Word, because that's the basis on which I'll be judged in the last day. So keep going. He says, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? I forgot to use my PowerPoint. Sorry about that. All right, let's try this again. You can read along. You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then, you see, he never says don't judge. Don't help your brother. Don't correct. Don't admonish. Don't encourage them to do right. Don't, help them overcome sin in their lives. He says, just take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to exercise the right kind of righteous judgment and to take the speck out of your brother's eye. You see it? Right there in context. The world is so eager to avoid moral responsibility that they misquote this verse perhaps more than any verse in the Bible. They're so quick to tell you, if you try to start preaching the truth, oh, you shouldn't be judging anybody. Now, that said, let me ask you a question. I would normally require you to write it down on a piece of paper. On a scale of 0 to 100, how moral, how ethical, how spiritual are you compared to the average person in this town? On a scale of 1 to 100, if you think you're the lowest most immoral person here, give yourself a 0. If you think you're the most righteous, then give yourself 100. If you think you're average, 50. What's the number you'd write down? Let me ask It's still working. Ain't breaking. Everything's glowing bright, though. Let me ask you a second question. On a scale, I better not move. Cameras will have to be switched. On a scale of 1 to 100, those of you from Fishinger and Kenny in the audience, how would you rate this congregation compared to other religious groups in town? What's the number? When I've asked this group to write it down, when I've asked this question before and had them write it down, you know what the average number I get is? It should be 50, but you know what I get? About 75. What's that about? It's a phenomenon known as overestimating your own morality. Okay? It's a phenomenon of being overly confident of how good you think you are. And in reality, I think it says something about us if we're overestimating our morality relative to other people. And in effect, I think what it's saying is that we're unaware of the gap between who we think we are and who we really are. And so what I want to talk about when I think of this topic of perfectionism is I want to remind us of our moral blind spots. That there are gaps between as far as your awareness of your own shortcomings. And that before we are so quick to see the faults of others, we need to be seeing the faults of ourselves first and dealing and addressing those as well. That said, I'll tell you a couple of illustrations to make this point. I attend a very large church, the Henderson Church of Christ there at Freed-Hardeman University. And if you ever go into the fellowship hall, you look along the walls, they've got headshots of all the preachers that ever preached there, all the elders that ever served there, all the deacons. These are some pretty impressive, this is a pretty impressive elite group. But you know what I also notice is that some of those men I know are no longer faithful to the Lord's church. They're no longer in the Lord's church. Or they're no longer preaching the truth. And I think that's sad that in Henderson, Tennessee, in the bubble, this well-established congregation, we're not perfect, are we? And I think it's important that we remember that we're losing 60-something% of our youth. At least for a time. By the time they reach college age, up until their mid-20s, we're losing nearly 2/3 of our young people in the Lord's church. So maybe we're not as good as we think we are. Or maybe that's the reason why they're leaving, is that they're overly confident about their spiritual condition. They don't need organized religion. They don't need people telling them what to do. They know how to be spiritual without being under the authority of an eldership or whatnot. I just wonder if this phenomenon isn't an explanation for a lot of the things that are going on in the church. There's a number of scientists who are actually getting into the neuroscience behind these kind of phenomenon, and they're recognizing certain behaviors, and they've uncovered some of the natural tendencies we have as human beings, like forecasting errors and ethical fading and moral revisionism, and they're all contributing to the phenomenon of prediction errors. We have different opinions of our own moral judgments, for example, before, during, and after an actual moral decision. I talked to the young people about this in a previous session. I said, as a young Christian woman going on a date, you have certain high expectations for yourself. And if I was to ask you, how are you going to conduct yourself on this date? Before you go, you're going to answer me, and you're going to most likely say you're going to be godly, you're going to be modest, you're going to be appropriate, right? You're not going to engage in any kind of lascivious or sexually inappropriate behavior. But the reality is that no matter what you tell me, a certain number of those people are going to do something different when they're in the moment. And it's because your brain actually has two aspects to it. And one is more of an emotional side, and the other is more of a rational side. And there's a professor of psychology at the University of Virginia, Jonathan Haidt, who speaks to this. And he says, look, think of a part of your moral decision-making mind as a big elephant, 2-ton elephant. And the elephant reacts quickly, and it's based on emotion and instinct. And he's just reacting, fight or flight kind of thing. And then the other aspect of our brain, though, think of it as a little rider that sits on top of the elephant. And the little rider is more deliberate and careful and rational, reasonable. And it's thinking through the decision. And it can actually, look at the map and follow the instructions and then tell the elephant you need to go left and now right and now straight ahead. He said, but the problem is that we sometimes need to be more aware of the fact that we're not giving our rider enough time to control the elephant. We put ourselves in certain situations that there's not enough space, not enough chance for us to find the way of escape that Jesus promises us. Scriptures promise us that He will not put you in a situation that He hasn't provided a way of escape, but you have to have enough self-discipline in your life, enough good habits in your life, develop enough integrity and virtue in your life, and enough character to be able to have enough space not to let the elephant take control. And you've got to have time for that rational rider to make the right decision. And so what happens is that a young girl with all good intentions before she goes on the date puts herself in a situation during the date where the elephant is the only one that has time to make a decision. And she allows motion and instinct and urges to take over the reins. And then after the fact, after the date's over, you know what she does? She then tries to rationalize, because now she's got time to think about it, and her rider takes back over and he tries to make excuses for what she just did. Well, we're in love. It's okay if you're in love, You see what I'm saying? That our thinking process about who we are changes before, during, and after an actual opportunity to prove who we are. Are you who you say you are? In season and out of season, the Scriptures say. Now, you got to preach the truth. You got to live the truth in a consistent way. That's what we mean by having a coherent faith, a person of integrity. But I think it's not easy. And I think it's important that we recognize that there are these moral blind spots that our human nature will create, and that we have an obligation to try to do the right thing, even in that context. Our young people need to be taught about moral blind spots and not be lulled into thinking they're good enough, they're perfect. It's sort of like Zaxby's. I don't know if y'all go to Zaxby's. It's one of the closest little restaurants on the south side of Jackson and Henderson, so I go there pretty frequently. And before I go to Jackson, you know what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking I'm going to get the salad. It's healthy. Maybe not. Maybe it'll hold back on the dressing, because that just adds to the calories. I'm going to be pretty good. And it's going to be grilled chicken. Grilled's the healthiest one. But by the time I get up to that line, I've been studying that board of all those choices, and that fried chicken's just calling my name. Those fried tenders. If I manage to get out of there, it's with a fried chicken salad at best. There's no way. And it's just the difference between me before I go in there and me at the counter. And then what happens afterwards is I start to rationalize and say, well, that buttery Texas toast, I didn't eat that this time. I didn't order an extra I really wanted to. And so I'm pretty good. And so relative to what I could have done, I didn't do that bad. You see the point? That we approach life like that. And the question is, God has called us to be like Him. He's called us to strive towards perfection. And the one thing that's going to keep you from getting there is that if you have deceived yourself into thinking you're better than you are. In fact, it's not going to keep you from getting there, because had you not deceived yourself, you would have been able to do it by pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. Instead, it's because His blood doesn't work for you unless you're able to confess that sin, unless you're humble enough to confess your sin. Because if you don't confess the sin, He can't forgive you. But if you confess it, He's just and able to forgive you. That's what the teachings of 1 John chapter 1 and 2 are all about. But they are reserved for those who don't have moral blind spots, but are willing to give over that sin to God and call sin sin. So we got to be honest. We got to be authentic about this thing. Otherwise, the gospel, the good news, the scheme of redemption can't work for us. It's not enough that your sins were washed away in the watery grave of baptism. Because when you come up out of that watery grave, you had a new purpose. You were set apart by God. You were sanctified. You were justified. You were washed. All your sins were washed away. But you still had to live in the world. You're not of the world, but you're in the world. And as long as you're in the world, you're going to continue to face temptation. And you will sin. And if you say you not have sinned, then you make God a liar. And the truth's not in you. So the question is not whether you're going to sin. The question is whether you're going to deceive yourself into thinking you're sinless. And ironically, the result will be that you won't be able to confess that sin, and so the blood of Jesus Christ won't cleanse you of that sin. Did you follow that? It's weird, isn't it? If you admit you're a sinner, the blood can cleanse you. If you don't admit you're a sinner, there's nothing left to help you. You've sinned, I believe. That's the sin against the Holy Spirit. I believe that's what he's talking about. You're the dog going back to his vomit. You have crucified Christ afresh, and there's nothing left that we can do for you at that point. That's a scary place to be. Are you perfect, or do you just think you're perfect? What do you want to be? Imperfect and forgiven, or thinking you're perfect and lost? That's a tough dilemma, isn't it? Now, Nathan said today, this isn't a new phenomenon, okay? Old Testament, you know King David, man after God's own heart. He commits this horrific sin of adultery or rape, I don't know what you'd call it, and murder. I mean, it's got to make the top 10 list. And yet, there's no evidence that he confessed that sin until what? Until someone came alongside him, the prophet of God, Nathan, and confronted him. And you know the story he set up about the rich man stealing the poor man's only sheep. And David was incensed and said, "Who is that man? I'm going to have him taken care of." And Nathan said to David, "You are the man. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you out of the hand of Saul. I did all this for you, and you have done this horrific thing." Only then does David fall to his knees and write Psalms 51 and ask God to cleanse him of that sin. No, cleanse that hidden heart. Purge him with hyssop. That secret sin that he had deceived, he had hidden from his own self. Now, that kind of change requires a kind of knowledge and awareness of your own shortcomings. In the New Testament, a similar story Jesus tells in the form of a parable. Now, I love parables. I love studying parables. Now, you got to understand the thing about a parable is it's not a historical account of actual events that have taken place. It does reflect, however, reality. And so this scene very well could have and probably took place more than once in time. And the scene is of a Pharisee trained in the law of God, praying versus a sinner, a publican even, a tax collector. And he says, the Pharisee, you remember the story, the Pharisee says, God, this is how he prays, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. You hear that haughty spirit? And Jesus asks him after he tells him the parable, he said, which one left the temple forgiven? Which one left the temple righteous? And they say, it wasn't him. It's the other guy. The other guy that said, oh, woe is me, I'm a sinner, and beat his chest and asked for forgiveness. See the difference? The difference is whether or not you are blind to your own immorality, your own shortcomings. So, first point, we're responsible even for the sins in our own blind spots. Perfectionism comes only by the blood of Christ. And the blood that washed away your sins at the point of baptism will continue to wash away your sins, but only if you walk in the Spirit, Romans 8, or walk in the Spirit, 1 John 1, and remain in fellowship with Him. And in order to do that, you must be willing to confess your sins. And then it says, He is just and able to forgive you of those sins. A continual attitude of humbleness that says, yes, I'm not perfect. I need you. I need to be forgiven. But it's not just that you're responsible for the sins in your blind spots. And Psalms puts it this way. It's any sin. Whether you intentionally sinned or in a presumptuous, rebellious way, or if it was just an unintentional, what the psalmist calls a hidden fault, hidden even from yourself. Look at the verse. Who could discern his errors? Declare me innocent, he's praying, from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. You want to be perfect? You want to be blameless? You want to be innocent of transgression? Then you've got to confess all sins, not just the big public ones everybody knows about, all of the sins. That's what Psalms 51 is. David's asking him to forgive. He's saying, look, I hope the whole nation doesn't know about this, but it doesn't matter. I need you to purge my hidden heart, secret heart, your hidden faults. You know presumptuous sins. If you've raised a toddler, you've seen that rebellion come out in them. They're just, you tell them not to do something, and they're just testing you at that age, right? That's presumptuous. That's the rebellious spirit. And that, of course, you got to confess and be forgiven by God if you're going to have that taken off your ledger. But I'm talking about the hidden stuff too. Now, this process of dealing with moral blind spots is not something you can do on your own. That's not the way God set up His church. That's the reason why we have the church, is because we need other Christians to help us see our moral blind spots. Now, the scriptures on this in the New Testament are numerous. And yet, of all of the doctrines in the churches of Christ, in the Church of Christ, of all the teachings, this is the one that we fall short the most in practicing. It's called church discipline. We've been threatened and sued and ridiculed into just really soft-shoeing this one. But look at what the scriptures are saying. Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, if they're not perfect, if they're making mistakes, if they're sinning, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. That word restore in the Greek is the same word that they would use as a physician back then to talk about setting the bone of a broken bone. And you've got to, if you've broken your arm, the doctor first has to set it straight, and then it'll heal. If they don't straighten it out, it will never heal right. It'll be crooked and will be non-functioning, dysfunctional forever. In the same way, you as a brother and sister, as the church, have a moral obligation to straighten out a brother who's wrong. You cannot continue to let him live his life in sin and habitually violating God's word, either ignorantly or intentionally. You've got to go to him and gently, right, as your spiritual brother, and help them straighten it out. You can't let them lull them into thinking that crooked, broken thing in their life is okay and don't worry about it. God loves you. He loves you just the way you are. That's not what the scriptures teach. That's not real love. You're not doing what's in their best interest. You have got to help restore it, straighten it, and then it'll heal. But be real careful. Judge not, lest you be judged. Right? What does that mean? Keep watch on yourself. Keep yourself humble, lest you too be tempted. You see the point? That you're so focused on the log in their eye, or the speck in their eye, that you forget there's a log in your own eye. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. What's the law of Christ? The golden commandment, the great commandment. To love God, but also to love your neighbor as yourself. He's saying that the way you fulfill that, the greatest commandment, is by practicing church discipline. We need each other's help in order to live moral lives, in order to be perfect in Christ. And I'm tired of us making excuses for why we allow our members to be sick in the only place that can heal them, and no one lifts a finger. 1 Corinthians 5 is a situation where they had the most horrific sin in their midst. It's actually reported that there's a sexual immorality among you of a kind that's not even tolerated among the pagans, for a man has his father's wife. And you are arrogant. That's even worse. Because ought you not rather to mourn? The implication is they were boasting in the fact they were so tolerant. They were such good Christians that they had tolerated this guy's shenanigans. And he's saying, shouldn't you be mourning, not celebrating? Let him who has done this thing be removed from among you. Practice church discipline. Why? Well, to see why, he says, when you are assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus, and my spirit is present with the power of our Lord Jesus, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Unless you create an environment which provides him spiritual fellowship, spiritual support, then unless you do that, then when you withdraw it, he won't notice, because you didn't have spiritual fellowship in the first place. But if you are spiritually supporting your brothers and sisters, when you withdraw it, he'll feel it. And when he feels it, he can see the consequences of sin. And sometimes you have to see the consequences of sin to know it's sin. He has to sometimes see it and feel it in order to hopefully come back to the fold, repent, confess his sin, and be saved before it's too late. That is how God intended for us to help each other with the sins we can't see. We're supposed to help each other see those sins by helping them feel the consequences of those sins, by withdrawing something of value. That is a tall order, because first you got to have a valuable relationship before you can withdraw it. If you have allowed people not to that are on the rolls for the last 5 years never to darken the door, and then suddenly you send them a letter saying you disfellowshipped them, you failed to follow the instructions because you failed to create a valuable relationship before you severed it. The whole point will not be felt on him. He'll just think that's salt in the wound. It don't have its intended effect. But if you're diligent about trying to have a close relationship with brothers and sisters in Christ, then, and dealing in not engaging in what I call gunny sack management, which is, well, you know, they did this one little thing, and then they did it again, and you just keep storing them up for years. And then after about 5 years, you finally whack him over the head with that gunny sack. That's not the way to practice church discipline. You need to deal with it. You need to nip it in the bud. You need to be like the 1-minute manager, right? There's an old book for business managers that talk about, as a manager, when somebody does something right, immediately praise them. And when they do something wrong, immediately take them aside and correct them. That's what we're supposed to be doing as Christians. If you're truly my brother and sister, you will take me aside right after the sermon and say, you know what you said there wasn't quite right. Or if you see I'm living a way in my life that's inconsistent with what I'm saying, say, brother, I'm praying for you because I noticed this. I saw you do this. I know we both are tempted by this kind of stuff, and you got to make sure you know, what can we do? Let's study together. Let's pray about this. If that kind of instant feedback was given all the time, then when I refuse and rebel and refuse to listen to you, and you've taken under Matthew 18 witnesses, and I still refuse it, then you tell it to the church and I still refuse, then it's time to pull the trigger and separate, and I'll feel it. Does that make sense? I'm telling you it works because it worked in this case. When you read the second letter to the Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians, I'll skip that part, but and this just explains how you're not to associate and whatnot. But go on to 2 Corinthians. Man, it's a great passage. I should have worked through it. I don't even have it in there, do I? Can't believe that. Yeah, somehow it's escaped. In 2 Corinthians, he says, look, this guy that I told you to withdraw from, it's enough now. It's enough. It worked, in other words. And so now your job is to love him. Now your job is to welcome him back into the fold. All right, so let's keep moving. The third point is we must be ready to forgive and love those who overcome their blind spots. You know, the truth is that none of us live perfect lives. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. Romans 3, Romans 6. And don't underestimate the consequence of that, but it's a universal problem. Once you've reached the age of accountability, there is no excuse. But for the blood of Christ, there is no hope outside of it. And so, knowing what God has done for you, saved you, how can we deny a brother or sister the same grace and mercy? Jesus was asked by his disciples, how many times we got to forgive them? And what was his answer? 70 times 7. In other words, there's no end. You got to keep forgiving him. Complete forgiveness. Perfect forgiveness. We've got to be willing and able to forgive and love those who are trying to overcome their sins and are asking for forgiveness and repenting, and because that's what God did for us. 2 Corinthians, there's the passage I was looking for. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. For such a one, this punishment by the majority is enough. So you should rather turn to forgive and comfort him, or he may be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. So I beg you to reaffirm your love for him. That's how church discipline works. You want to be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect? That's a command from the Lord. The only way is keeping yourself in the continual cleansing power of the blood. And if you're in fellowship with God, his blood is working for you, and those that you're in fellowship with will continue to help keep you walking in that light with their love and their admonition, but if necessary, their discipline. You know, let me give you this one example. Same-sex marriage. There's a tremendous need to minister to those struggling with same-sex attraction in and out of the church today. It's a big issue in our society. It's a growing problem. A lot of children are questioning their sexual identity and insisting that they feel more like a boy even though they were born a girl, or vice versa. Now, folks, that's going to be some tough issues to work through for themselves, for their family, and for their church. And don't think it won't come to the church. The question is not, are you more righteous than them on a scale of 1 to 100? I'm a whole lot better off than them. No, we all need the grace of God, right? And so we've got to be able to extend a hand to somebody struggling with a sin, even a sin that's as abominable as homosexuality. And I'm convinced the only way to do that is for us to have this mind that Jesus Christ had. Philippians chapter 2, verse 5. And 1 John 1 says that mindset is what we've been talking about. Perfection is in Christ. It's walking in the light. And if you're in that fellowship, then his blood will continually cleanse you of your sins. And then he says, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar and his word is not in us. Do you believe that? That's the rest of the gospel story that you've been called to preach to every creature here on earth. No matter what they're struggling with, no matter what sin, no matter what trouble, sin they're going to have to overcome in their lives, that's the gospel message. There's nothing that will separate them from the love of Christ. Now, what I'm saying is they may continue to struggle with sin just like you continue to struggle with sin. The question is whether they are habitually practicing that sin or whether they're continually confessing that sin. It's the world of difference. And the world of difference means that if they're continually confessing it, they're perfect, even as their Father in heaven is perfect. And they can know that they know that they know they're saved. I don't know what you're struggling with, whether it's something that's common to all of us or something that's unique only to a few. But I don't care. There's no sin that God is too big for God. And there's no sin that I'm not called to help you overcome. As your brother, you as my sister and brother, I hope that you'll do the same for me. I hope that we as Christians understand our purpose here on life. It's not to appear better than everybody else, to make them think that we think we're better than everybody else. It's to humble ourselves before our God, because the last shall be first and the first last. It's to show them that we submit to God enough to love them and help them do the same. That's perfection. And it's something that we can achieve and attain. In fact, we must attain. I truly believe on the day of judgment, you must stand before him blameless. And the only way to do that is hiding behind the cross, knowing that the blood continues to cleanse you of every stain. I hope this message speaks to you, but more importantly, I hope it's something that you're practicing already in this congregation, because I know it'll make a difference to the world. It's going to impact them if they truly get what we have to offer. And that is not a manuscript, not a rule book to show them how to be perfect, but a plan that allows them to be perfect despite the fact that they aren't perfect. Allows them in the eyes of God to truly be righteous and have a hope and to not worry about guilt and to see and experience a kind of love that's not judgmental, that is conditioned only on one thing, that you love him enough to obey his commandments. Thank you.